When the surprise witness walked into that courtroom, I swear time stopped. My husband sat there next to his lawyer, both of them radiating that disgusting confidence of men who think they've already won, who think the woman they've destroyed is too broken to fight back. I couldn't believe I was watching this moment actually happen. The moment when everything I'd been building in silence, every piece of evidence I'd hidden, every truth they'd tried to bury, was about to explode right in their faces. They'd humiliated me, backstabbed me, cheated me, lied to me so many times I'd lost count, made me feel crazy for seeing what was right in front of my eyes. The shocking part wasn't even the infidelity anymore, or the way his whole family had turned against me like I was the villain in my own marriage. What I discovered next, what that surprise witness revealed, exposed a level of betrayal so systematic, so calculated, that even I, who'd lived through it, could barely process what they'd really done. The truth about what my husband had been hiding, about who had helped him, about how deep the family drama and financial fraud actually went, was about to walk through those courtroom doors. And when it did, when that witness took the stand and started talking, my husband and his smug lawyer went absolutely white because they knew exactly what was coming, and they knew there was nothing they could do to stop it. There sat Marcus, my husband of 7 years, next to his smug attorney, both looking like they'd already won. His mistress wasn't there that day, but I could still smell her cheap perfume from the last hearing, still see how she'd smiled at me like I was nothing. The betrayal had started months before I even knew, back when I thought we were building a life together, back when I trusted him with everything. I couldn't believe how blind I'd been. How easily he'd made me feel crazy every time I questioned the late nights, the distance, the coldness that had crept into our bed like winter frost. But that moment, watching him sit there so confident, so sure he'd destroyed me completely, I knew the truth was about to flip everything upside down. The judge hadn't even called the session to order yet, and already I felt like I couldn't breathe. My lawyer, Patricia Hayes, sat beside me with this calm expression that I'd learned meant she was 3 steps ahead of everyone else in the room. She'd told me to trust her, to let the evidence speak, to remember that karma doesn't forget addresses. Marcus glanced back at me once, and I saw it there. That same look he'd given me when he told me I was imagining things, when he made me feel humiliated for even suggesting he'd cheat. His whole family had backed him up too, made me feel like the villain in my own marriage. The family drama had gotten so thick you could cut it with a knife. His sister Melissa feeding him information about every move I made, every conversation I had. Revenge wasn't even on my mind back then. I just wanted to understand why the man I loved had turned into a stranger who'd backstabbed me in every way possible. It had started so small, you know? A charge here, a withdrawal there, nothing that screamed danger until suddenly our joint account looked like it had been ransacked by thieves. Marcus told me it was investments, told me I wouldn't understand the complexity of business finance, told me to focus on my little projects while he handled the real money. That's how he talked to me toward the end, like I was some decoration he'd grown tired of dusting. The shocking part wasn't even the cheating, not really. It was how methodically he'd planned to leave me with nothing. Jewelry purchases I never received, hotel rooms I never slept in, flowers that never made it to our house. All of it charged to cards that had both our names on them. Every transaction felt like another layer of lies, another piece of evidence that I'd been living with a man who saw me as an obstacle to remove, not a partner to cherish. His family made it worse. God, they made it so much worse. I'd spent 7 years trying to fit into that clan, baking for their gatherings, remembering birthdays, listening to his mother's stories about Marcus as a boy. Then suddenly, I was the outsider, the problem, the reason their golden boy was unhappy. His sister Melissa became his spy, reporting back everything I said to her in confidence, twisting my words until I sounded paranoid and controlling. When I saw her at that barbecue, standing next to that woman, next to Sabrina, his mistress, laughing like they were old friends, something inside me just shattered. The family betrayal cut deeper than Marcus's infidelity, if I'm being honest, because I'd trusted them, confided in them, believed they saw me as one of their own. I was so humiliated, standing there with my potato salad like an idiot, while they all pretended I didn't exist. My dignity was disappearing right in front of me, and nobody seemed to care. But you know what's funny about hitting rock bottom? Sometimes that's where you find your backbone. I stopped crying after that barbecue, stopped begging Marcus to talk to me, stopped trying to understand why this was happening. Something shifted in me, something cold and clear and absolutely done with being the victim in this story. I started watching instead of reacting, noticing instead of confronting, documenting instead of destroying. Every bank statement, every credit card bill, every receipt I could find went into a folder that grew thicker by the week. Marcus thought I was defeated, thought he'd broken me down so completely that I'd just sign whatever papers he put in front of me and disappear. He had no idea that while he was busy draining our accounts and planning his new life with Sabrina, I was building a case that would expose every lie he'd ever told. The day I walked into Patricia Hayes' office wasn't planned. It was pure chance. Or maybe it was justice finally paying attention to my situation. I'd gone to that coffee shop to escape our house, to sit somewhere that didn't smell like betrayal and broken promises. She was at the next table, taking a call about another divorce case, and something about the way she talked, firm but compassionate, strategic but human, made me lean over and ask if she was taking new clients. When I told her my story, showed her the folder I'd been carrying around like a security blanket, her eyes lit up in a way that scared me and thrilled me at the same time. "This isn't just infidelity," she said, flipping through statements and receipts. "This is dissipation of marital assets, and if what I'm seeing is accurate, your husband might be in bigger trouble than he realizes." Payback wasn't something I'd thought I deserved, but sitting there with Patricia, I started to believe that maybe, just maybe, I could reclaim what he'd tried to steal. The first thing Patricia did was subpoena Marcus's business records, and watching his face when he got served was almost worth everything I'd been through. He called me screaming, actually screaming, about how I was being vindictive and trying to ruin him over a simple divorce. Simple, that's what he called it. Like 7 years of marriage and a systematically drained bank account was just a minor inconvenience. The lies were so casual at that point, so automatic, that I wondered if he even remembered what the truth looked like anymore. His lawyer sent threatening letters about how I'd contributed minimally to our assets, how I'd been financially dependent while he built everything we had. I couldn't believe they thought that narrative would work, that a judge would just ignore how I'd supported his business in the early years, how I'd worked 2 jobs so he could invest in that first office space. But that's how gaslighting works, right? Say something enough times, with enough confidence, and people start wondering if maybe it's true. The financial red flags weren't subtle once you knew where to look. They were practically neon signs pointing to betrayal. There were charges to jewelry stores in towns we'd never visited together, hotel suites booked on weekends when Marcus claimed to be at conferences, flower deliveries sent to addresses I didn't recognize. Each line item told a story of deception, of a whole secret life he'd been living while I made dinner and waited for him to come home. Patricia's forensic accountant, this brilliant woman named Elena, started mapping out the money trail like she was solving a murder mystery. Every transfer, every withdrawal, every suspicious transaction got highlighted and categorized. The shocking thing was how much had vanished. Money that should have been building our future, instead financing his affair and God knows what else. Vengeance still wasn't my goal, but seeing it all laid out like that, seeing the systematic way he'd robbed us, something hardened in my chest. Marcus's defense was always the same: business expenses, client entertainment, investment opportunities I was too unsophisticated to understand. He'd look at me with those eyes that used to make me feel safe and tell me I was paranoid, that I was letting my insecurity ruin our marriage. His sister backed him up, of course, telling me I needed to trust my husband and stop being so controlling about money. Even his mother, who I'd thought genuinely cared about me, started getting distant, like my unhappiness was somehow an inconvenience to their family harmony. The family drama escalated every time I tried to get answers. every time I asked why our savings account had shrunk by 40% in 6 months. They closed ranks around him so tight that I felt like I was suffocating, like I was the problem for noticing that our life was falling apart. Being backstabbed by people you considered family hits different than being cheated on by a spouse. It's a special kind of betrayal that makes you question every relationship you've ever had. The month before he filed for divorce, Marcus got sloppy, or maybe arrogant, I'm still not sure which. He stopped even pretending to hide the transactions, stopped making excuses for the missing money, just reduced my access to our joint accounts and started depositing his paychecks elsewhere. When I asked where the money was going, he told me he'd opened a business account and that I didn't need to worry about it. That's when I knew he was preparing to leave me with nothing, that all the gaslighting and isolation had been building to this moment where he'd file papers and disappear into his new life with Sabrina. The humiliation of it all, the way he'd planned my financial destruction so carefully while I still slept beside him every night, still made his coffee every morning. It was almost impressive in its cruelty. I started taking pictures of everything, screenshots of accounts before he could lock me out completely, building my case one piece of evidence at a time. Karma was coming, I could feel it, but it needed documentation to work properly. When the divorce papers finally arrived, they were even worse than I'd imagined. Marcus was claiming he'd built the business entirely on his own, that my contributions were negligible, that I deserved maybe 20% of our assets if I was lucky. He'd inflated his expenses and deflated our income, making it look like we were barely scraping by when I knew we'd been comfortable for years. His lawyer had clearly coached him on every detail, every lie calibrated to make me look like a gold digger who'd coasted on his success. Reading those papers felt like being cheated all over again, like the betrayal had layers I was still discovering. But here's what Marcus didn't know. While he was busy rewriting our history, Patricia and Elena were building a timeline of fraud that would make his fictional narrative look ridiculous. The truth was coming, whether he was ready for it or not. I spent those weeks feeling like I was living in a crime scene, every room of our house a reminder of what we'd been and what he'd destroyed. Marcus moved into the guest room, barely spoke to me unless his lawyer required it, treated me like I was already gone. He kept everything on a small external hard drive he guarded like a secret vault, locked in his home office where he thought I'd never think to look. Some nights I'd hear him on the phone with Sabrina, laughing about something, planning their future like our marriage was just paperwork he hadn't finished filing yet. The rage I felt was clean and cold, nothing like the messy grief from before, just a clear understanding that I was watching a man destroy himself, and he didn't even know it yet. Patricia kept telling me to stay calm, to not react, to let him think he'd won, because overconfident people make mistakes. And we needed him making as many mistakes as possible. So I played defeated. I played broken. I let him and his family think they'd successfully humiliated me into submission. But every night I organized those files, cross-referenced those statements, built the case that would prove justice could still exist in this world. The real discovery started when Elena found the first inconsistency in Marcus's business filings, a consulting fee paid to someone named Sabrina Chen for marketing services. $67,000 over 8 months, paid in neat monthly installments that coincidentally started right around the time Marcus became too busy for date nights. Patricia pulled the company registration, and guess what? Sabrina had no business license, no website, no portfolio, no evidence she'd ever consulted for anyone about anything. She was a yoga instructor who occasionally sold essential oils on Instagram, not a marketing professional. The lies were so obvious once we started pulling threads, but they'd been buried under layers of legitimate business transactions, camouflaged just enough that a casual audit might miss them. I couldn't believe he'd been this stupid, paying his mistress through the company and thinking nobody would ever notice. But that's what cheating does to people. It makes them feel invincible, like they're smarter than everyone else, until suddenly they're not. Then Elena found Melissa's payments, and honestly, that betrayal stung almost as much as Marcus's affair. His sister, who'd pretended to be my friend for years, who I'd confided in about my marriage problems, had been receiving $14,000 for administrative services she never performed. The family drama suddenly made perfect sense. Melissa wasn't just reporting back to Marcus out of loyalty. She was being paid to spy on me, paid to feed him information about my emotional state, my plans, my conversations. Every coffee we'd had, every girls' lunch where she'd encouraged me to talk about my feelings, had been reconnaissance she'd sold back to her brother. The shocking part was how cheap my trust had been to her, how easily she'd commodified our relationship for what amounted to spending money. Revenge still felt like the wrong word for what I wanted, but accountability was starting to sound pretty damn good. But the real smoking gun was buried deeper, hidden in an LLC called Coastal Ventures that Marcus had registered 18 months earlier. $93,000 had been funneled through this shell company. Money that came from our business but never appeared on any tax return or financial disclosure he'd filed with the divorce court. Elena traced the accounts, followed the paper trail, and discovered that Coastal Ventures existed solely to hide marital assets. It had no employees, no office, no business activity except receiving transfers from Marcus's legitimate company. This wasn't just infidelity or even dissipation. This was fraud, the kind that gets people referred to the IRS and the Attorney General. The truth was so much worse than I'd imagined, but also so much better for my case, because Marcus had essentially documented his own crimes in an attempt to rob me. Patricia actually laughed when she saw the records, this dark, amused laugh that meant someone had really messed up. "Your husband," she said, "is going to regret not just giving you a fair settlement. Organizing all this evidence became my full-time job, my obsession, my pathway to reclaiming everything he'd tried to steal. I created spreadsheets that cross-referenced bank statements with business filings, highlighted every payment to Sabrina and Melissa, mapped out the flow of money into Coastal Ventures." Patricia wanted documentation so thorough that Marcus's lawyer couldn't poke a single hole in it, so airtight that a judge would see exactly what had happened and who was responsible. The humiliation of those months living in the same house with him, pretending I didn't know about his schemes while I built the case that would destroy his defense, was its own special kind of torture. But I kept thinking about justice, about karma finally showing up, about how good it would feel to watch his smug face crumble when he realized I wasn't the naive wife he thought he'd married. Self-worth is funny. You don't realize you've lost it until you start fighting to get it back. Marcus got more confident as the trial date approached, more certain he'd win, more careless about hiding his plans with Sabrina. He'd take calls right in front of me, talking about the house they'd rent together after this messy business was over, discussing furniture and vacation plans like I was already erased from his life. His lawyer kept filing motions claiming I was being unreasonable, asking for continuances, trying to drag things out until I ran out of money or patience. They thought they were wearing me down, thought the system favored the person willing to fight dirty and fight long. What they didn't know was that every delay gave Elena more time to dig, more time to find connections, more time to build an ironclad case. The payback I'd stopped believing in was assembling itself piece by piece, and I just had to be patient enough to let it arrive. The night before trial, I barely slept. Part of me was terrified we'd miss something, that Marcus's lawyer would find some loophole, that the judge wouldn't care about the fraud and betrayal as much as we needed them to. But another part of me, the part that had been growing stronger these past months, knew we had him. The evidence was overwhelming, the pattern undeniable, the crimes documented in his own handwriting and bank records. Patricia had prepared me for every question, every attack his lawyer might throw, but she'd also prepared something else, something she'd been keeping secret even from me until the last moment. "Trust me," she said, the night before we walked into that courtroom. "Justice is coming, and it's going to be beautiful." I didn't know what she meant then, but I was about to find out why sometimes the best revenge is simply exposing the truth. The surprise came from the last person I expected, the one person in Marcus's family I'd written off as completely lost to his manipulation. His mother, Eleanor, had reached out to Patricia 3 weeks before trial, requesting a private meeting that nobody could know about. When Patricia told me, I didn't believe it at first. Eleanor had been cold to me for months, had stood by while her family excluded and humiliated me, had attended dinners where Sabrina sat in what used to be my seat. But apparently watching her son brag about destroying his wife's financial future had crossed some line even Eleanor couldn't ignore. Later, Patricia told me Eleanor said she'd started paying attention months earlier, noticing the lies, the cruelty, the systematic destruction. But it took witnessing Marcus laugh about how I'd be lucky to afford a studio apartment when this was over to finally push her to act. The betrayal she witnessed in her own living room had awakened something in her that loyalty to her son couldn't suppress. She'd contacted Patricia in secret, knowing that what she had to share could expose her son, but also knowing that what he'd done was fundamentally wrong. Eleanor told Patricia everything, every conversation she'd overheard, every admission Marcus had made about hiding money, every strategy meeting he'd had with his lawyer in her home while she served them coffee and pretended not to listen. She revealed that Marcus had confessed to creating Coastal Ventures specifically to hide assets from me, that he'd planned the financial devastation months before filing for divorce, that he'd joked about me being too dumb to figure it out. The shocking cruelty of it, hearing how he'd talked about me when he thought only his allies were listening, would have destroyed me a few months earlier. But by then, I was past devastation. I was focused on justice, on making sure his lies couldn't triumph just because he'd told them confidently enough. Eleanor also told Patricia where to find the real evidence, that same external drive Marcus guarded so obsessively, the one with the actual revenue figures he'd hidden from divorce discovery, the one that proved every financial statement he'd filed was fiction. The family drama this created was something I only heard about secondhand, through Patricia's careful updates. Eleanor had to hide her cooperation completely, attending family dinners where they all discussed trial strategy, listening to Melissa count the money she'd already spent from Marcus's promised victory, watching Sabrina plan renovations to the house that was still legally half mine. She played her role perfectly, the loyal mother supporting her son, while secretly ensuring that truth would have its day in court. I couldn't believe someone who'd seemed so complicit in my humiliation was actually working toward my vindication. Karma works in mysterious ways, I guess. Sometimes it uses the very people who helped create the betrayal to expose it. Eleanor never told me why she did it, but Patricia said it was something about dignity, about Eleanor seeing herself in me and remembering what it felt like to be underestimated and lied to. The hard drive was the evidence we needed to seal Marcus's fate completely. Elena's forensic analysis showed revenue numbers 3 times higher than what Marcus had disclosed, proved that the struggling business narrative was entirely fabricated, documented every illegal payment to Sabrina and Melissa down to the cent. This wasn't just dissipation anymore. This was perjury, fraud, tax evasion, the kind of thing that brings criminal charges along with civil penalties. Patricia filed an emergency motion to admit the new evidence, attaching enough documentation that Marcus's lawyer couldn't claim it was fabricated or irrelevant. I watched the motion go through the system, knowing that Marcus had no idea what was coming, no idea his own mother had handed us the weapon that would destroy his entire defense. The truth was about to walk into that courtroom wearing the face of the person he trusted most, and I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. The morning of trial, Marcus looked smug, relaxed, like this was a formality before his inevitable victory. He'd dressed in his best suit, the one he wore to close big deals, projecting success and credibility for the judge. His lawyer kept glancing at me like I was a nuisance they'd soon be rid of, occasionally whispering reassurances to Marcus that made him smile that confident smile I used to love. Sabrina sat in the gallery, I noticed, trying to look respectable in a modest dress that couldn't hide what she really was. Melissa was there too, playing the supportive sister role, probably already planning how she'd spend whatever settlement Marcus thought he'd keep. They'd all come to watch me get defeated publicly, to witness Marcus reclaim complete control of the narrative and the assets. What they didn't know was that Patricia had subpoenaed a witness they'd never prepared for, someone whose testimony they couldn't discredit without destroying Marcus's entire case. The courtroom doors opened, and everything changed. Eleanor walked in wearing her church clothes, the ones she saved for important occasions, and the color drained from Marcus's face so fast I thought he might pass out. His lawyer started frantically whispering questions, but Marcus just sat there frozen, watching his mother take the witness stand with an expression I'd never seen on him before, pure terror mixed with disbelief. Patricia stood and announced Eleanor as our surprise witness, and I watched Melissa's face crumple, watched Sabrina's confidence crack, watched Marcus's lawyer realize they'd walked into an ambush with no defense prepared. The judge looked intrigued, which was better than we could have hoped for, and asked Eleanor to state her relationship to the defendant. When she said, "I'm his mother," the judge's eyebrows went up, and I knew we'd already won just by the shock value alone. Justice was about to be served by the person who'd given Marcus life, and the irony was so perfect it almost felt scripted. Eleanor's testimony was surgical, precise, devastating in its calm recitation of facts her son couldn't deny because she'd heard them from his own mouth. She described conversations where Marcus detailed his plan to hide marital assets, where he'd laughed about transferring money into coastal ventures before filing for divorce, where he'd told his lawyer exactly how much he thought he could get away with hiding. The lies he'd told the court were exposed one by one, each contradiction documented by a mother who'd apparently been taking notes. Patricia asked Eleanor why she'd decided to testify against her own son, and Eleanor looked directly at Marcus with something between disappointment and grief. "Because what he's doing is wrong," she said simply. "And I didn't raise my son to be a thief and a liar, even if that's what he's chosen to become." The betrayal on Marcus's face was almost funny. He'd built his whole strategy on family loyalty, and here was his mother destroying him in the name of basic morality. But Eleanor wasn't finished. She told the court about the hard drive, about overhearing Marcus instruct his accountant to create a separate set of books that wouldn't be disclosed in discovery. She revealed conversations where Marcus and his lawyer had strategized about making me look financially incompetent, about painting our marriage as me coasting on his success when Eleanor knew I'd worked 2 jobs to help fund his business startup. She even admitted that Melissa had been paid to spy on me, that those friendly coffee dates were reconnaissance missions Marcus had commissioned through his fake consulting payments. The shocking comprehensiveness of Eleanor's knowledge made it clear this wasn't last-minute guilt. She'd been watching, listening, and documenting for months, maybe from the moment she realized what her son was really doing. The truth was pouring out faster than Marcus's lawyer could object, each revelation another nail in his carefully constructed coffin of lies. The moment Patricia introduced the hard drive into evidence, Marcus's whole defense collapsed like a house of cards in a hurricane. Elena took the stand and walked through the forensic analysis, showing the judge side-by-side comparisons of what Marcus had disclosed versus what the hard drive revealed. By the time Elena finished, over $200,000 had been traced through fake expenses, inflated costs, shell accounts, and undisclosed revenue, money Marcus had sworn under oath didn't exist. The judge's expression went from professional neutrality to barely concealed anger as the evidence mounted, as it became clear that Marcus hadn't just tried to cheat his wife, but had committed perjury in this very courtroom. His lawyer tried to argue procedural objections, tried to claim the hard drive had been obtained illegally, but Patricia had documentation showing Eleanor had the right to access her son's office during a visit to his home. Everything was legal, everything was admissible, and everything pointed to systematic fraud. Marcus's lawyer asked for a recess, probably to convince Marcus to settle immediately before things got worse, but the judge denied it. I could see the panic in Marcus's eyes now, the realization that his perfect plan had been exposed in the worst possible way, by the worst possible person. When Patricia asked Eleanor how she felt about her son potentially facing criminal charges for perjury and fraud, Eleanor's voice cracked slightly but didn't waver. "I love my son," she said, "but I love the truth more, and I love the dignity of women who've been lied to and cheated and backstabbed by men who thought they were too smart to get caught." The courtroom went silent at that, and I saw the judge nod slightly, like Eleanor had articulated something fundamental about justice that everyone present understood. This wasn't just about dividing assets anymore. It was about accountability, about proving that cheating and lying and stealing have consequences, even when you think you've covered your tracks. The judge didn't waste time after the evidence phase concluded. She reviewed the documents with a focus that made Marcus's lawyer visibly nervous, occasionally asking Elena to clarify a transaction or timeline. Then she looked at Marcus with the kind of disappointment you usually reserve for someone who's personally offended you and delivered a ruling that exceeded even Patricia's optimistic predictions. 70% of all marital assets to me, including full ownership of the house, the car, and the legitimate business accounts. Coastal Ventures would be frozen and liquidated, with all funds going to me as compensation for dissipated marital assets. The business would be reappraised by an independent evaluator since Marcus's valuations were clearly fraudulent. And then the real hammer dropped. The judge was referring Marcus's case to both the Attorney General's Office for Fraud Investigation and the IRS for tax evasion, since hiding business income implied he'd been filing false tax returns for years. Vengeance had never been my goal, but watching justice arrive in the form of criminal referrals felt pretty damn close. But the judge wasn't finished. She looked at the payments to Sabrina and Melissa, payments made from marital funds for fictional services, and noted that both women could face tax fraud charges for unreported income and potentially conspiracy charges for participating in the scheme. Sabrina went pale in the gallery, suddenly understanding that being the other woman wasn't her only problem anymore. Melissa looked like she might cry, her easy money about to become the most expensive $14,000 she'd ever received. The judge ordered full restitution of all dissipated funds, awarded me attorney's fees, and imposed sanctions on Marcus's lawyer for filing financial disclosures the lawyer should have known were false. Marcus just sat there, not moving, not speaking, watching his life implode in real time. I felt nothing watching him crumble. No satisfaction, no anger. Just a calm certainty that karma had finally done its job, that the truth had been powerful enough to overcome all his lies and manipulations. I walked out of that courtroom in silence. No dramatic speech, no tears, no confrontation with Marcus or his family. Patricia handled the logistics, the paperwork, the details that would turn the judge's ruling into actual money and actual accounts. Eleanor caught my eye as I left, and I nodded to her. Not forgiveness, exactly, but acknowledgement that she'd done the hardest thing a mother can do, chosen truth over loyalty to her child. The reclaiming of my dignity wasn't loud or theatrical. It was quiet and solid, the kind of victory that doesn't need an audience. I'd gotten everything I wanted and things I hadn't even known to ask for. The house where we'd built our life, financial security that Marcus had tried to steal, and most importantly, proof that I wasn't crazy or paranoid or any of the things he'd gaslit me into believing. The truth had been exactly what I thought it was, and now everyone knew it. The aftermath came in waves over the following weeks. Marcus faced IRS audits, Attorney General investigations, potential criminal charges that could mean prison time if they proved he'd deliberately committed tax fraud. His business reputation crumbled as word spread about the court findings, as clients learned their consultant had been caught lying under oath and hiding money. Sabrina lost her yoga studio when the tax authorities came asking about her unreported consulting income, and she couldn't explain services she'd never actually performed. Melissa faced similar scrutiny, her easy payday turning into a nightmare of legal fees and potential criminal liability. The family drama exploded, I heard, with Eleanor being accused of betrayal while defending her choice to testify, with Marcus's siblings taking sides and relationships fracturing. Justice had rippled outward from that courtroom, touching everyone who'd participated in the lies, everyone who'd thought they could cheat the system and me without consequences. I spent the first month after the trial just existing in my house now, fully and legally mine, without the weight of Marcus's presence, without the constant anxiety of wondering what he'd take next. The peace was almost disorienting after so many months of strategic thinking and evidence gathering. Patricia checked in regularly, updating me on the criminal investigations, the asset transfers, the reappraisal of Marcus's business that was revealing even more hidden value than we'd initially found. Every update was another piece of my life being returned to me. Another confirmation that the system could work if you had enough documentation and the truth on your side. The payback wasn't about seeing Marcus suffer, not really. It was about reclaiming everything he'd tried to steal and proving that betrayal doesn't always win. That sometimes the person who cheats gets exactly what they deserve. People started reaching out. Friends who'd distanced themselves during the divorce. Colleagues who'd heard rumors and wanted the real story. Even strangers who'd heard about the case and wanted to share their own stories of marital betrayal and financial abuse. I realized my experience wasn't unique, that countless people had faced similar schemes, similar lies, similar feelings of helplessness against a system that seemed designed to favor whoever could afford the better lawyer. Some of them had won their cases, others had settled for less than they deserved. All of them carrying scars from battles they never chose to fight. Sharing my story became important, not because I wanted attention, but because maybe, just maybe, someone else in my situation would read it and realize they weren't crazy, weren't paranoid, weren't wrong to question when things didn't add up. Documentation, patience, and the right legal help could overcome even the most elaborate betrayal. The humiliation I'd felt watching Sabrina at that barbecue, watching Melissa pretend to be my friend while reporting everything to Marcus, watching his family treat me like I didn't exist, all of it transformed into something different. Not pride exactly, but self-worth. The kind that comes from fighting for yourself when nobody else will. From trusting your instincts, even when everyone tells you you're wrong. I'd gone from being the woman who couldn't believe her husband was cheating to the woman who'd exposed a multi-layered fraud scheme and sent multiple people scrambling for criminal defense attorneys. The transformation wasn't about revenge or becoming cold or hard. It was about remembering that I deserved honesty and fairness and basic human dignity, that accepting less than that wasn't marriage, it was self-erasure. Marcus had tried to make me disappear, and instead, I'd made his lies impossible to ignore. Looking back now, I can see how every piece had to fall into place exactly as it did. The chance meeting with Patricia, Eleanor's crisis of conscience, Elena's forensic brilliance, even my own decision to document everything instead of just reacting emotionally. The shocking truth is that justice isn't automatic. It's not something that just happens because you deserve it or because you're right. Justice requires work, strategy, allies, and an almost obsessive attention to detail. But when it arrives, when you watch a judge call out lies from the bench and award you not just money but validation, when you see karma finally catch up to people who thought they were untouchable, it's worth every sleepless night, every moment of doubt, every second of that terrible cohabitation while I built my case. I couldn't believe how much my life had changed in less than a year, how I'd gone from victim to victor by simply refusing to accept the story Marcus was trying to write about us. The truth had been on my side all along. I just had to fight hard enough to make it heard. So tell me, have you ever been in a situation where someone thought they'd destroyed you, thought they'd won, only to watch karma serve them exactly what they deserved? Have you faced betrayal from the people who were supposed to protect you, family members who backstabbed you for money or loyalty to someone who didn't deserve it? I want to know your stories, your moments of justice, or even your moments where you're still waiting for the truth to come out. Drop a comment below and tell me, what would you have done in my situation? Would you have fought, or would you have walked away with nothing just to escape? And here's the real question. Do you think Eleanor was a hero for testifying against her own son? Or did she betray her family by choosing my side? I'm genuinely curious because this whole experience taught me that justice and family loyalty sometimes can't coexist, and we all have to choose which one matters more. If this story resonated with you, if it made you feel something or reminded you of your own battles with infidelity, financial abuse, or family drama, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. I share real stories like this one, stories about reclaiming your dignity when someone's tried to steal it, about finding justice when the system seems rigged against you, about karma finally showing up when you've almost stopped believing in it. These aren't fairy tales. They're real experiences from real people who refused to stay victims, who documented, who fought, who won. And trust me, you're going to want to see what happens next, because the stories I have lined up will make you rethink everything you thought you knew about revenge, payback, and what it really means to reclaim your self-worth. Don't miss out. Subscribe now, because the truth is always more shocking than fiction, and these stories prove it.